On October 17th, an Su-34 military plane went down in the Russian city of Yeisk. It crashed straight into a high-rise building. The pilot managed to eject, but 15 civilians died, and 25 were hospitalized. The Su-34 is one of the most advanced Russian aircraft, which crashed due to a technical malfunction. A large fire broke out after the crash and explosions were heard. Then the media reported that the plane was with full tanks of fuel and with a full set of weapons. Immediately after takeoff, its engine caught fire and it lost control. Just 5 days later, history repeated itself. On October 23rd, an Su-30 fighter jet crashed into a private house in Irkutsk. Both pilots died. The media reported later that the pilots were performing a test flight after repairs of the plane. There was a depressurization issue and the oxygen masks were faulty, so the pilots died right there in the cockpit. When the plane ran out of fuel, it crashed like a stone into a civilian home. Imagine yourself in the occupant's shoes. You're sitting in your kitchen, having dinner with your family, and suddenly a multi-ton fighter jet falls on your house. Fortunately, at that moment the house was empty and no one was killed except for the two pilots. More than 10 different military aircraft have gone down in Russia recently. I decided to find out what is going on with Russian fighter jets and why they started to crash so often. After studying this topic, I came to the conclusion that there are two main reasons for all these plane crashes. I will reveal them now, but again, let's go back a little bit in time. I want you to understand that military aircraft crashes in Russia are really beginning to occur on a massive scale. On the 9th of October in the Rostov region in Russia, a fighter jet Su-34, and just a few hours after that, another plane, the Su-25, went down. Two military fighters went down in one day, and in one of them, the pilot even died. Also, two more planes crashed in Crimea. On October 1st, an Su-25 went down and one Su-34 went down not long before that, in September. That makes 6 crashes in just over a month. All these crashes always had the same reason: technical failure of the aircraft. And in the beginning, it seemed very strange to me. Did the Russians really run out of serviceable planes? After all, even according to the most conservative estimates, Russia has about 1,600 combat aircraft ready for combat. Even if we assume that Ukraine has shot down 275 Russian fighter jets, according to their official data, Russia should at least have 1,300 more combat-ready aircraft in service. Why then are the Russians flying malfunctioning planes? I was able to find out that Russia does have some very serious problems with its air force, and here is what is really going on. The first reason is that Russia has already lost most of its new planes in Ukrainian skies, and what's left are old machines in need of overhaul. Putin wanted a quick victory over Ukraine, so from the very first days, he threw the best of the Russian army into the fight. The Russians wanted to conquer Ukraine's air supremacy, but they did not succeed. Ukraine skillfully dispersed its air defense systems, making them difficult to find. Because of this, Russia lost its best fighters in the first days of its military operation. The Russians have not flown into Ukraine for a long time, but use mostly obsolete Su-24s and Su-25s along the front lines, and they still continue to lose several planes a week. It's almost certain that the fighter jets remaining in Russia are in very poor condition and all require partial or complete repairs. Most of them are old planes produced during the Soviet era. For more than 30 years, these aircraft have not been properly maintained. After all, such equipment needs serious care, and this is very expensive. For many years, Russia has not been able to modernize and repair most of its aircraft. Most of the military expenditures were stolen by officials. Only now have they started to repair old Soviet aircraft, but it's too late now. They are losing more than they have time to repair. I found out that between 2009 and 2020, the Russian armed forces received about 400 new fighter jets, but Russia lost almost 300 of them in hostilities in Ukraine and Syria. Another 100 fighter planes have to patrol Russia's vast territory. So it turns out that Russia no longer has any new fighter jets left that it could have used in Ukraine. That's why they started repairing old Soviet planes, and it's these planes that have been going down lately. So right here, the Russians have a very serious dilemma. To repair an old Soviet fighter jet, they need components that were produced in the USSR. They are not available now, and Russia cannot get new, more modern components because of sanctions. So now the Russians are experiencing very incredible difficulties with modernizing and rebuilding their fighters. As far as I understand, China is in no hurry to help them in this endeavor. China does not want to strengthen Russia, which could become its enemy in the future. Another problem Russia is facing currently is the shortage of experienced military pilots. According to the most conservative estimates, Russia has already lost more than half of its trained pilots that had many years of experience. It is impossible to train a pilot in a few months. It takes 2 years or more. It often happens that when the Ukrainians shoot down another Russian fighter jet, the pilot either dies or is captured by the Ukrainians. To solve this problem, Russia has begun conscripting old pilots who have long been retired. They too fail very often because they have lost their skills over the years. The Ukrainians have already captured such retired pilots. All this suggests that the Russian military aviation industry is on the verge of collapse. They can build no more than 50 new fighter jets a year, if modern components are available to them. But under sanctions, I'm afraid that Russia will not be able to even build that. Many parts they have to replace with lower quality parts. Many functions will have to be abandoned. Something will have to be stolen, and all this will be reflected in the course of combat use. Most likely, we are dealing with an ordinary Russian reality. There is one reality on paper and a completely different one in practice. On paper, Russia has at least another 1,300 ready-made fighters, but in fact they are all old Soviet machines in need of serious repairs and upgrades. That is, in fact, there are a little more than 100 usable military fighters left in Russia, and they are forced to be on combat duty to guard Russia's long borders. And already in the near future, the whole aviation industry of Russia may be under threat. If they do not learn to produce modern high-tech equipment themselves, in time, their aircraft fleet will become completely useless, and Russia will cease to be a great aircraft-building power forever. The situation in Russia is very similar with tanks. According to documents, at the beginning of 2022, the Russians had 10,200 tanks in storage. But as it became known recently, almost all of them are unusable. Intelligence and even satellite images show that these tanks are nothing more than scrap metal. All of them are in need of the most serious repairs, which is what Russia is doing now. Instead of producing new tanks and planes, the Russians are busy repairing old Soviet vehicles. For example, the biggest tank factory in Russia, Uralvagonzavod, has made it a target for the whole year ahead to have 800 tanks repaired and supplied to the front. The situation with aviation is much worse. Without modern electronics, the planes will just be a flying piece of iron, and no one will give modern technology to Russia anymore. This is the reality of the Russian military industry.